like to be remembered as an innovator. I think it was General MacArthur said, "You're remembered for the rules you break." And I've broken some rules to make this. I think I've broken them with logic and good engineering behind me. The carbon fiber and titanium. There's a rule you don't do that. Well, I did.
Yeah, this topic about Titan, the submarine that tragically imploded on its way to Titanic earlier this week. Basically, we're doing some research into the CEO, and there are some very interesting things out there about him, to be honest with you. So what I've done, I've compiled a few interviews of him obviously prior to this, and also him talking about how he designed a hull, a very similar material, a fibre composite material, like not like steel or anything like that, but carbon fibre, where two different substances are put together and layers and layers and layers are made, etc. I'm sure you know with carbon fibre, when you look at the inside, the unfinished side, you can see like almost like stitching of material, where it's overlapped together. Anyway, he talks about that and talks about how he went down to 4,000 meters, which is just deeper than Titanic. He went down years ago in this hull, and apparently it cracked and popped all over the place, and it really scared him. And he said we went down a second time, and these noises are supposed to be less the second time. All the little weak materials, he claimed, weak materials, that's a bit worrying, should pop and crack the first time. The second time it should be far less or gone. And the second time he went down in it, it was equally as loud. So for him, he said, right, let's scrap that, we'll make a new one. And the new one is Titan, right? So he talks about that. It's a very, very interesting interview, /talk, all right? Many of you won't have seen this before, so stay tuned. And it just goes to show that there are people out there who maybe have the heart in the right place, like this man, but they're very impulsive, maybe a little bit like me. They're quite impulsive, and they don't go through the proper procedures, to get these things done properly, and they want to do it on their own back, and they want to be the hero. And he also talks about wanting to be remembered for, as we just heard, being an innovator and somebody who broke the rules and succeeded maybe, and made this new thing where he had broke rules to get there, and he was the first to do so. You can understand from an engineering perspective, then everybody wants to be that person. But when it comes down to something like this, like, I don't have a huge understanding on these types of things, right? I'm not claiming to be an expert, but I do have an understanding on pressure. I do have an understanding on underwater pressure, and I also have an understanding on materials as well. Now, the pressure down there, you can quote all these different numbers that people maybe can't put into perspective, right? But 3.5 tons, 4 tons of pressure per square inch, right? Now, a square inch is obviously 1 inch by 1 inch, right? So a very, very small area. 3.5 tons pressing on that, every square inch, all over the thing, right? That's incredible. Like, that is an insane amount of pressure.
The colors were just staggering. I mean, you have these reds and greens and blues that you just don't see in a lot of images because they don't get as close as we were able to, and you can't get enough light on it. But once you get a lot of light on it, you get these colors just step out, and I was amazed. I sort of look at this thing and go, I don't know, even if you didn't know what it was, you'd say, that's a beautiful picture.
You were so excited about being able to make this happen, and now that you've done it, how do you feel?
Well, I can tell you how I felt right when we were done, which was exhausted. And now I'm just, I have the same anticipation of what comes next. We're doing this tour of the sub, and then we're going to go back in next year, so gearing up to do it again. And then all the things that are now coming out of it, now that we've been to the Titanic, the number of partners and folks who were sort of on the sidelines waiting to see how it turned out are all now super excited to join in. When we got to the wreck, I think what I found the most surprising, it looks like it does in the movie Titanic. You get to the bow, and there's that moment of awe when you're looking at the bow and saying, well, this is what I've seen so many times.
The shot everybody knows.
The shot everybody knows. And as you can see, very little current, so we're just able to cruise along here. So this is just debris from the wreck. There's a saucer. To do this, we had to use a different material. Titanium is the common. There's some high-strength carbon steels that are used. I think the Russians use those. But titanium is, let's put it this way, carbon fiber is 3 times better on a strength to buoyancy basis than titanium. And underwater, that's what you care about. It's not strength to weight, it's strength to buoyancy. And yet no one had done that. And there are certifying or semi-certifying agencies, the Pressure Vessels for Human Occupation Committee that handles hyperbaric chambers in submarines. You have the SubSafe program in the Navy. These programs are over the top in their rules and regulations, but they had nothing with carbon fiber. So we had to go out and work on that. And one of the things I learned is, when you're outside the box, it's really hard to tell how far outside the box you really are. And we were pretty far out there. So we have a carbon fiber hull, it's 5 inches thick, and titanium domes on the end. One of the things that I think a lot of people appreciate is if you're not breaking things, you're not innovating. If you're operating within a known environment, as most submersible manufacturers do, they don't break things. Woods Hole does a lot of autonomous things. They have a whole wall of stuff they've broken. To me, the more stuff you've broken, the more innovative you've been. And this is a 3rd scale model that we took to the chamber at the University of Washington and took it to destruction. And once you go over 6,000 PSI in the Ocean Sciences Building, you can only do that at night. And then they get on the loudspeaker and they tell everybody to get out. And now I'm standing next to this chamber, and we blow this thing up. It's the loudest thing I've ever heard. It shook the whole building, blew out all the pressure sensors, which I had to rebuy for the university. But it helps us validate an acoustic monitoring system, because in the research found out that with composites, what you really want is acoustic monitoring. Strain gauges don't tell you a lot, because they just tell you the deformation on the inner surface. When you're dealing with composites, acoustics will pop and crackle, and it's almost like having an EKG. You can tell how the hull is doing. And if we were going to stretch this new material in a new environment with people inside, we needed to know well before it failed that it failed. Our rule is we risk capital, we don't risk people. So if somebody comes to me and says, hey, here's a new idea for the sub, if the end result of that failing is that we cancel a mission or we lose a little money, that's fine. If somebody gets hurt, then we go and find out a different approach. And with the acoustic monitoring system, we can tell if the hull has had some problem over time. Maybe it was run into by a forklift and we didn't know it, or dropped in its transport on its way to the East Coast. Because the pressure and temperature at 1,000 meters and 2,000 meters and 3,000 meters is always the same. And so if it's making noises at that depth that it didn't make on the last dive, then we can stop the dive, we can go up, and we can find out what might have happened. We made one hull. I took it to 4,000 meters, and it made a lot of noise, which is a very sphincter tightening experience. We brought it back, and it wasn't getting quieter on the second dive. It should have been dramatically quieter. If you think about it, when you get to this maximum pressure, it's a thing called the Kaiser effect. You get a lot of popping and crackling, and the next time you go to that pressure, you should have a lot less. All those weak fibers and voids have all been taken care of, and this hull wasn't doing it. So we scrapped it. We went back. We built another one. The first one we had done was with a highly recommended marine manufacturer. We went to aerospace quality. We use the same pre-preg that's used on the 787. With our partners, and we couldn't have done any of this without partners. Great partner in Electro Impact up in Everett. Great to be in this community where there is such a preponderance of expertise in titanium and carbon fiber and manufacturing and engineering. We did work with Janicki, Boeing, NASA. There's 667 layers of carbon fiber in just what's called a 090 axial and rotational layup, which is not normally done, but in the ocean, that's all you see. You don't get any torsional moments. We built this hull up. We tested it at the Deep Ocean Test Facility in Annapolis, Maryland, an amazing facility, the only one on the planet where you can put something like that for a test. And then in 2021, after having to cancel twice before, we were able to go out and dive on the Titanic. The challenges that we've run into in regulatory transportation, we're shipping containers across country, across international boundaries. During the pandemic, we got all of our mission specialists in with much difficulty. and were able to do some dives, capture some amazing footage, and then went back this last year and actually brought an 8K camera, because we have this gigantic dome. You can see the mission specialists have their iPhones in there capturing great images. We get great images on the outside. And one of the things I really liked was on the last dive of the last mission this year, we had one extra dive. So when we go out, we're over the Titanic for 5 days. We have to do 2 dives to fulfill what we've told our mission specialist clients if they're going to get to the Titanic. We've got 5 days to do that. We were weathered out on every cycle. We only got the 2 dives that we needed to get. On the last day of the last dive, we had one extra one, and we dove on a target that was a sonar target from 25 years prior. Thought it might be a shipwreck. It turned out to be a subsea reef, 10,000 feet underwater. And it had all these sponges and soft corals. You can see the 2 green dots there. Those are 10 centimeters, 4 inches apart. So these are fairly large structures, and we'll be, have a press release and we're submitting some papers on this amazing oasis of biodiversity in the abyssal plains. The researchers like to say. It's really incredible. It's what I love doing about going in the sub. Every time I dive, I see something I've never seen before that no human has probably ever seen before. This is if you weren't on this reef, it's just mud with occasional rocks that get dropped by icebergs coming south. So as icebergs come down and melt, they'll drop these bombs of rocks, and then over the years, maybe a coral will grow on it here and there. But this thing was incredible. It was 20 meters high, 100 meters long, and totally unknown and undiscovered. Come back to the media part of this. If I'm going to change our awareness of the ocean, it really is going to come through the media. And we do a lot with video. We had some great 4K video that we put out last year. When we launch something on YouTube, we typically 10, 20,000 views is considered pretty good. This year we launched a video that got to 1 million views after 2 months. We go, wow, that's great. And then 3 weeks ago we launched a video of our 8K, and it went to 4 million views in 2 weeks. And I don't know if you've had viral videos, but it's really sort of a fun feeling. You wake up in the morning, you want to see how many more people. It's very addictive. But what we're doing with the 8K and the 4K is to try to make this more accessible for the folks who can't afford the $250,000 that it costs to go with us on the dive. But what we want to do is do immersive exhibits like the Van Gogh and other immersive exhibits that are very popular, so that you can go out and see an image of the Titanic as it was just a few months ago, or over the period of years as we go back year after year, in photorealistic 3-story high image. I think that's going to be very compelling. We're also working on streaming series, and BBC will have a piece coming out actually tonight on our expedition. But that's really how we're going to change how people perceive the ocean, at least in my opinion, and hopefully get us spending as much time and money and attention to the ocean as we do to space. I think space is wonderful, but I'm a little more prone to think that the ocean is really, right now, the critical thing we've got to understand. Climate change, how the planet responds to climate change, it's all in the ocean, and we know almost nothing. So I'm really excited to do that, and thank you again for having me here, and it's been great to present what we do.
So what a sad outcome there. Clearly hearing him talk, he was a very optimistic man, very experimental person, wanted to innovate. Sadly, cost him his life along with 4 other people. One thing I learned from that is that carbon fibre, or any composite build-up like of materials like that, like very similar, basically they get weaker and weaker after each pressure cycle. So like with an aeroplane, hundreds upon thousands upon takeoffs and pressure cycles, and the flex in the body, the flex in the wings, they're frequently tested. But the materials are made to do that. They use materials that are renowned and tried and tested for that. Now what he's done, he's used a material which gets weaker and weaker each time, and they say that carbon fibre is excellent for certain things, but one thing that it's not very good for is pressure from the outside. So like a pressure cell cabin, like a submarine, where you need to keep the pressure inside the same, and external pressure is need to be resisted from the outside, right? Now, I'm pretty sure they say that carbon fibre is very good for the opposite. So for a canister or something to be pressured from the inside out, it'd be very good. Now, he's gone against that, and they say that water can, like microscopic particles of water, very small amounts, can get into the carbon fibre layers and basically weaken it each time. Now, by the look of that, that submarine, Titan, had done, I think, 6 or 7 dives in 2021, and I think 7 in 2022, right? That's a lot of dives, but at the same time, you can imagine that that's made him very confident. Because like with a steel structure or a titanium structure, you don't get that weakening over time. It's either strong enough or it's not strong enough. And you can when you make it, you can plan that and work it out that it will be strong enough, depending on what grade steel it is, how it's made, how it's machined, temperatures it's subjected to, etc., right? Carbon fibre, you don't really have that. So initially, when he did his initial test, and then he's gone down again and again, obviously in his head, it's fine. As long as he doesn't go deeper or something changes, he's fine. And with a steel structure or titanium, that would probably be the case. Having listened to experts on the topic recently, that's my understanding of that. Now, carbon fibre, along with other similar materials where there's 2 materials put together to make it up, apparently that doesn't work with that. They weaken over time. And he had sensors on there to sense the sound, different sounds. Essentially, you know, he probably knew it was going to fail, which is why he dropped the weights in the submarine, right? We heard that he dropped the weights, or somebody dropped the weights, just before contact was lost. He obviously realised what was happening. He knew. He'd been down there many times, and he knew something was different. Maybe the noises were louder. Maybe one of the sensors went off and said, like, this is an unusual loud noise, louder than normal. But of course, down at that pressure, you can't just come up, even if you could. And even if you managed to reverse it and it was on the way up. If something is weak and about to go, the pressure is not just going to drop when you start to come up, right? You've got 2 miles of water above you. The pressure is going to be insane, pretty much for the most of that journey up. Unless, you know, when you get near the surface, a couple of 100 meters away, obviously the pressure is going to be a lot lower. But in terms of 3,500 meters, which is where contact was lost, and say 3,000 meters, yeah, it will be less pressure, but we're talking ridiculous amounts of pressure anyway. So you're releasing it from insane amount to slightly less insane amount. You know, it was never going to happen. Once it started to fail where it failed, that was it. It was game over. But I think in that split second, if he knew, he knew. If he knew, then he knew. He knew what was going to happen. So yeah, guys, we're going to look a little bit more into this topic because it's quite an interesting one and it's a very sad one. And, you know, you can only feel for the people going down there. Hopefully they didn't suffer. And if it was an implosion, which we know it is, then they wouldn't have known anything about that. You know, an implosion is where basically, opposite from an explosion, it concaves inwards. And the pressure would have equaled itself so fast. The oxygen inside of the vessel, be it any left, where the people were, would have been compressed, they say, as much as a diesel engine. So basically would have been compressed from a huge amount of air, space, into nothing in a millisecond. And that would heat it up. Compressed air gets hot very quickly. A little bit like your turbo compressor on a car when you heat it up to when you wind it up to say 30 psi, that gets very hot. Now you can imagine heating it up to like 6,000 psi. The air would have been, they say, hotter than the sun's surface for that second. So the people would have died 3 times over from the heat, from the compression, from the water. They wouldn't have known, which is somewhat good to know, I suppose. But we're going to look more into this topic, and I hope you enjoyed the interview. Not enjoyed it, but I hope it opens people's eyes as to what this man was doing, how he did it, and the way that he was thinking. You know, we all want to know what he was doing and what the hell he was doing, really. What was he thinking doing that with people in there? Well, maybe now you can understand where his confidence came from. Not a good place, but a false sense of hope by the seams of it. And we're going to look more into it. Stay tuned on that, guys. All right.